Oh, hello.
Nearly 3 years after the murder of John Benet Ramsey, the case remains unsolved. But the detective who first handled the case has no questions about who is guilty.
I know who killed Jean Benet. There's no doubt in my mind who killed Jean Benet. And while this investigation is still ongoing, I don't think it's appropriate that I say that name out loud.
Linda Arndt was the first detective on the scene at the Ramsey house on December 26, 1996, the morning John and Patsy Ramsey had reported their 6-year-old daughter Jean Benet missing. Arndt was the only officer there for much of the day. She later would be roundly criticized, vilified in the press as responsible for a bungled investigation. Now she's speaking out to set the record straight, telling her side of that dramatic day 3 years ago. It all began with a call at 6:30 in the morning from her sergeant.
He said there's been a kidnapping. It involves a 6-year-old girl. There was a ransom note, a 2.5-page ransom note, and according to the ransom note, there was going to be a phone call from the author, and they were supposed to call between 8 and 10 a.m. So I was supposed to get to the house for purposes of monitoring the phone call.
8:10 a.m. Arndt arrived at the Ramsey home and meets John Ramsey for the first time.
How did he strike you?
Cordial.
Cordial?
Mm-hmm.
Upset?
Cordial.
Distraught?
Cordial.
Did it strike you at all that that was behavior that was unusual for somebody whose child was just kidnapped?
It's been my experience that people respond to trauma in different ways. So if someone has a response that is different from mine, I don't put judgment to it. I'll just note it.
And that is what she says she did all morning, make mental notes of all things curious, including, she says, the fact that Mr. and Mrs. Ramsey remained apart in separate rooms for most of the day. That at one point, she says, John Ramsey took time out in the middle of the crisis to read his mail.
I remember seeing John in the kitchen, looking through his mail, and I made a note that he was looking at his mail, and then I wondered, where did your mail come from?
Isn't it possible maybe he was opening the mail looking for a clue from the kidnapper?
I don't know, and I don't speculate. It's a piece of information that I see. It's something that I note.
You thought it was unusual, however.
I can say that it stuck out.
10 a.m., the deadline imposed by the writer of the ransom note for a telephone call.
10 o'clock comes and goes, and there's no acknowledgement within the house from anyone that the deadline imposed by the author of the ransom note has come and gone.
Nobody said it's 10 o'clock and the kidnappers haven't called?
Nobody said that.
Was that something else you took note of?
Absolutely.
By 10:30 in the morning, Arndt was the only police officer in the house with John and Patsy Ramsey, their pastor, and 4 family friends. As they waited for news, the tension was mounting. Arndt called her station house for backup repeatedly, but none had arrived.
How many times did you call the police department asking where your backup was and what was going on?
Well, I remember at least 2 calls. Both times I was told everybody's in a meeting. They got your message. And that was it.
Were you feeling pressure being in charge of a group this large and with anxiety that high?
I felt tremendous pressure.
1:01 p.m. Although the house had already been searched by patrolmen before she arrived, Arndt says that in order to break the building tension, she asked John Ramsey and his friend Fleet White to search the house again, top to bottom, looking for anything out of place. She says she gave them specific instructions not to touch anything. She says John Ramsey headed straight to the basement. She heard Fleet White scream for an ambulance, and then a chilling discovery. For Arndt, the pieces of the puzzle fell into place.
And I see John Ramsey carrying Jean Benet up the last 3 steps from the basement. And my mind exploded. And everything that I had noted that morning that stuck out instantly made sense. And Jean-Benet was clearly dead. Then she's been dead for a while. I ordered him to put Jean-Benet down. I knelt next to her and I leaned down to her face. And John leaned down opposite me. And his face was just inches from mine. And we had a nonverbal exchange that I will never forget.
You see her, the fields, as she wants to play. Find yourself floating her stream till she's run away. Let her arms embrace the sun and join her fire again. Children dancing, having fun, holding flowers of May. Don't you know that she's the spring when she smiles at the day? You will be forever young. You will kneel and pray. Let her arms embrace the sun, join her fire again. Children dancing, having fun, holding flowers of May. But it's okay, you.